I'm Kevin Roos, a tech columnist at the New York Times.
I'm Casey Noon from Platformer.
And this is Hard Fork.
This week, New Yorker writers Ronan Farrow and Andrew Marantz join us to discuss their spicy new profile of Sam Altman. And then, it's time for one good thing.
Well, Casey, the talk of the town in San Francisco this week has been, there have been two talks of the town. One we already covered in our A. That was the Claude Mythos.
This town conducts multiple conversations at the same time. But one of them...
amazing at multitasking.
Yeah.
The other big talker this week has been this big piece in the New Yorker about Sam Altman.
Yes, more than 16,000 words devoted to a question that has come up once or twice on Hard Fork, Kevin, which is, can Sam Altman be trusted?
Yes, the writers on the piece are Ronan Farrow, famous for his work on the Harvey Weinstein investigation and others, and Andrew Marantz, who is a good friend of mine and a longtime writer at The New Yorker. They worked on this piece for a very long time, talked to many, many people in and around Sam's orbit, and tried to answer the question of, who is this guy?
Yeah, and also, why does that matter, right? We're talking during a week where these systems have arguably experienced a step change in what they can do. And I think those kind of advances just naturally should draw more scrutiny onto the people running these companies. What do they know about who they are, how they operate? Are they honest with each other? And this piece offers one of the more comprehensive portraits that we have had so far, I would say, on that question.
You know, Ronan Farrow investigating you has to be one of the scariest experiences.
Oh, I know.
You pick up the phone, it's like, hi, it's Ronan.
But it seems hot too, you know. That's what everyone wants, is just a really handsome man asking them a lot of questions, you know?
Okay, so let's bring in Ronan Farrow and Andrew Marantz. Ronan Farrow and Andrew Marantz, welcome to Hard Fork.
Thank you, guys.
Happy to be here.
I mean,
Thanks.
truly long time, first time. And in fact, I brought receipts to that effect. This is your show. You can take or leave this in the edit, but I wanted to show what a devoted longtime fan I am of Hard Fork. I know the show well. I know you guys like merch, and I know you guys like disclosures, but you don't have any disclosure merch to my knowledge. So I had these made for you.
Come on!
One for each. One for you, one for you. I'm going to put it in the mail after we get off, but...
One of them says, I work for the New York Times, which is suing OpenAI, Microsoft, and Perplexity for alleged copyright violations. The other one says, and my fiance works at Anthropic.
Oh my gosh. That is amazing.
So, I mean, time limited. It's going to be a time capsule. But, I mean, made at the print shop in Brooklyn, one of a kind, exists nowhere else on Earth.
That's incredible.
Wow.
And I also...
Is this payback for when I gave you a hat at your wedding?
And I gave you one at your wedding, so I
That's
think we're
true.
even
We
on
have
that,
a sort of a theme going on here. Okay.
Right. Well, and that's also our disclosure, which is that Kevin and I are buds and have known each other forever. So actually, Casey, you can come to me anytime. I know you guys like to rib and roast on the show, so you can come to me behind the scenes for any roastable Kevin material.
My dream has been to get the New Yorker to investigate Kevin Roos. So you guys really could not have come along at a better time.
We're on.
Don't tempt us.
Yeah.
I'm not picking up the phone.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about this big piece that you both just published in The New Yorker. The title of the piece is, Can Sam Altman Be Trusted? Now, usually there's this sort of folk rule about headlines that end with question marks, which is that the answer is always no. So I want to put this question to you. Can Sam Altman be trusted?
Well, I think one important thing to note is the piece is really forensic and even. And actually to a point where I've been happy to see there's a range of reactions, right? There's people who have answered that question in a very severe way and looked at the fact pattern that is laid out here and the documentation that's laid out and said, you know, this is someone who poses an acute danger and should be kept away from an authority position. And then there's people who, I mean, hilariously enough, my mother called me and she's like, you know, I kind of like him. and so I think that is a true reflection of our intentions. In this case, as you might imagine, there was deep consultation with all of the subjects of the reporting to really understand their feelings. And anytime we thought there was a persuasive argument from Sam or anyone else that, something shouldn't make it in or something would be sensationalist, we really carefully discussed that editorially. So the result is very even. And I would say on the question itself, what we lay out is something that is remarkable, I'd say, even against the backdrop of the culture of mistrust in Silicon Valley, where everybody understands and expects, right, that being a founder means telling different audiences different things at times to some extent, where everyone understands that the entire enterprise is building based on hype long before there is actual actionable deliverable product. Even against that backdrop, there is an extraordinary preponderance of people who emerge from interactions with Sam Altman, including close years-long ones, with really active complaints and allegations that he lies repeatedly about things big and small.
Well, one of my favorites was when you quote him telling you that he wears a gray sweater every day to avoid decision fatigue, and then he shows up for his next interview in a green sweater. That felt like a really satisfying
detail. That was just
detail.
for you, Casey.
Thank
I
you.
was wondering if people were
appreciated
going to catch that.
I appreciate that eye for fashion that you so rarely get in these tech profiles.
Andrew was our fashionista in the writer's room.
Always. But that's the kind of thing where, we didn't want to make too much of that, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like, oh, we caught you in this deep hypocrisy of, choosing a green sweater. Like, and this is consistent with a lot of the things people say throughout the piece and throughout the career of Altman and OpenAI, is that there isn't this one smoking gun thing where he's like caught, with his hand in the cookie jar. It's this sort of allegedly longer, more subtle accumulation of facts, which my kind of like glib and, annoying way of describing it is like the fabled memos and documents that were compiled that led to him being, fired in 2023 and that have kind of dogged him throughout his career. They really shouldn't have been like a secret bullet-pointed list. They should have been a 16,000-word New Yorker piece, because they only really make sense when you like lay them all out together in narrative form.
Yeah, I mean, you guys mentioned in your story that there have been sort of these rap sheets that have been circulating about Sam inside OpenAI and other parts of the AI industry for years. One of them was compiled by Dario Amodei when he worked at OpenAI under Sam Altman. One of them you said was maybe circulated by some allies of Elon Musk and people who are opposed to OpenAI. So give us some sort of behind the scenes details about what is being said by whom and how and to what ends about Sam Altman in Silicon Valley.
Well, it was really important to us to filter for the obvious competitive incentives out there. There are people who are massively incentivized to go after Sam Altman. And the reality is that there are very firmly evidence-based critiques, many of which are promulgated not just by the rivals, although they're certainly amplified by them happily, but also by more neutral figures and people who are just kind of technologists who aren't in the fight. And then there is the white-hot center of the rivalry, the stuff you mentioned that I think is in a very different category, which is, Elon Musk and other direct competitors really amplifying everything they can come up with. And in some cases, we document things that are inflated or trumped up or just seem to not be true. So Elon Musk in particular has intermediaries circulating some pretty spicy and pretty unsubstantiated material in Silicon Valley, and we talk about that.
I really appreciated that about the piece, because this has become like more salient over the past year as these rivalries heat up and you hear more and more of these scurrilous rumors. And while I do think this winds up being a pretty damning portrait of Sam on the whole, you do also point out that in some very real ways, he's the subject of a legitimate smear campaign.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's absolutely accurate.
Yeah. And we were trying not to go in, with naivete of like, can you believe business titans are being mean to each other? But like the level of this really does seem kind of shocking and unprecedented. And, it's kind of consistent with people who think of this as like whoever gets the ring first will control the world. Like it just seems like all bets are off. And so as a reporter, it's very challenging to be like, do you bring up the scurrilous rumors to knock them down? And so we had like months of conversations about how best to do that.
So there's been a lot of reporting on Sam Altman, especially around the board coup a few years ago. Could you maybe give us like the 2 or 3 things that you think are new and important from your reporting that rise above the rest in terms of people's understanding of Sam Altman and OpenAI?
So I think there are things here that put to rest some of the long-standing rumors, right? I mean, Altman has always said, and Paul Graham at Y Combinator has always said, he was not pushed out. He left of his own volition. It really seems from our reporting that that was not the case. They have talked a lot about their fundraising in the Gulf, in the Middle East, as innocuous. All businesses do this. It really seems from our reporting that the relationships that Sam has cultivated with some Emirati and Saudi royals is deeper than was previously realized. Ronan, what am I missing? There are several things like this.
We just didn't really know in full what was in those Ilya Sutskever memos. We didn't really have the detailed, multiple-sourced, heavily documented accounts of the individual proof points that were offered in those memos. We didn't have the contents of those Dario Amodei notes, and we didn't have a lot of these people on the record yet. So I think actually in a way that was a disservice not only to Sam's critics, but also to Sam himself, there was a bit of a veil of mystery, and that wasn't purely accidental. One of the things we document that's new here is, as a condition of the exit of the board members who had moved against Sam that he wanted out, they insisted on an outside investigation. What happened there is, in my view, quite extraordinary, which is, yes, at private companies, sometimes reports of this type, when a law firm is brought in to restore legitimacy, can be kept out of writing. Often it's to limit liability. And often legal experts say it's a bit of a red flag. This is a different kind of case. This isn't just any private company. This is a high-profile scandal that engulfed Silicon Valley when Sam was fired.
And ostensibly at a nonprofit.
At a 501c3, exactly. And so there were stakeholders, not just in the public, but within this company. That would be the bare minimum threshold, right? Where senior executives thought, okay, we're going to get some kind of at least detailed summary of what this law firm investigation found when they invoke it to rubber stamp Sam coming back. And instead, what happened was an 800-word press release that said there had vaguely been a breakdown in trust and offered very few other details. And what we report in this piece for the first time is there wasn't a report. For years, people were like, where's the report? Where's the report? There wasn't a report because it was kept out of writing. And this is no longer just a speculative supposition. One of the 2 board members who Sam helped select, who oversaw this process, just explicitly says, well, a written report was not needed, is now their line on this.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up. It was actually my favorite detail in the piece because it was something I'd been curious about forever.
The thing that I found most interesting from the piece were the people who spoke on the record, or at least, gave you quotes, and some of them were unattributed, about Sam who I think previously might have supported him, or at least felt like there was no upside in sort of, talking about him in a negative way in public. There was a Microsoft executive quoted in your piece as saying that there's a small but real chance he's eventually remembered as a Bernie Madoff or Sam Bankman-Fried-level scammer. There's another unnamed board member who said, quote, he's unconstrained by truth, and said that he has, quote, an almost sociopathic lack of concern for the consequences that may come from deceiving someone. I haven't been on a lot of corporate boards, but I think that is something that's quite rare to hear a board member say about a CEO of a company. I'm just curious, like when you were weighing these statements, did you feel like there are people who used to be fans of Sam who have soured on him, or are these people who have really held a grudge against him for a long time?
The thing that you point out about people changing their tune over time, I think is an integral part of what we document in the piece, which is, the fact that Sam Altman comes up through this Y Combinator world is not incidental. The fact that he has an investment portfolio in, by his own estimation, about 400 other tech companies. The fact that he has sat on everyone's board and everyone has sat on his board. I think our sort of line about this in the piece is like, we spoke to people who were Sam's friends, Sam's enemies, and given the mercenary nature of Silicon Valley, some people who have been both, right? So given that that's the landscape, you are going to have people who change their tune as the wind blows different ways. And that's a lot of how Altman's been able to weather a lot of this stuff in the past.
One thing that results from that spread of opinions is, to your question about evolving takes on Sam, there's definitely a class of nuts and bolts investors, prominent people in Silicon Valley who are really pragmatists, not just safetyists, and who are growth and business oriented, who told us that at the time of Sam's firing of the blip, they gave him the benefit of the doubt. And especially because of the factor we talked about before, where there just was a dearth of clear information. In that void, a lot of prominent people gave him the benefit of the doubt and saw only upside in bringing him back and removing the board that tried to fire him. There are a number of those prominent people in that category now who say, I don't know that I would have given him the benefit of the doubt if I knew everything then that I now know.
It just strikes me, though, that everyone who digs into this winds up coming back with essentially the same story. You know what I mean? It's like there are not like 17 versions of Sam Altman out there, like depending on which reporter calls which different source. I feel like we now sort of know like the broad outlines of this person's psychology.
I don't know. I want to challenge that. Like I do talk to people who are big fans of Sam, who some of whom work for him, some of whom don't. Clearly, this is a guy who has been able to, at various points, like lead very important technology projects and like rally people behind a vision. These people are not like mindless sheep. Like they're critical and discerning and thoughtful people. So I don't want to like seem like I'm, taking Sam's side on anything, but I just like, I think that there are a lot of people with very strong feelings about Sam Altman. Positive and negative. I think the positive side tends to be more like people defending him in private, and the public side tends to be more people criticizing him. But I don't know. I guess for Ronan and Andrew, like, do you feel like there are vocal supporters who you came across in reporting the story who had sort of no direct employment relationship with OpenAI or Sam, or weren't leading companies that he invested in or something, who were like, yeah, this guy seems pretty good and smart and talented?
Yeah, I was an 11-year-old who used ChatGPT to pass 6th grade.
Oh my God.
No, there were legit defenders of Sam on a number of these fronts who we talked to for sure. I mean, I think a lot of this has to do with like, what baseline expectation are you starting from? Like, if you think of this as a business and you start from the premise that people who run giant successful businesses have to say a lot of different things to a lot of different people, like, why is this a story? I think, though, there's a kind of level setting here where one of the things you can do when you take a big sort of putting everything in one place narrative effort like this is you can start from the beginning and remember what the original pitch was. And when you go back to what the original pitch was, the defense of, why are you guys being so naive? This is a normal competitive business. Like, okay, so when you pitched this as a nonprofit, safety-focused research lab that would aggressively comply with all regulation, like, were the people who believed that naive to believe it at the time, right? So that's when the defenses start to feel a little more like pressured to me.
Yeah. Also, like, for what it's worth, it's like, is it really a story that this guy's, telling different things to so many different groups? It's like, that's not like really a story that gets told about Satya Nadella. It's not really a story that gets told about Sundar Pichai. It's not really a story that gets told about Tim Cook, right? Like, there does seem to be something really unusual here. And my question for you guys, now that you've sort of spent so much time immersed in this company, is, what do you think it means for OpenAI?
Well, I mean, luckily we have a really robust independent tech media to, so I was going to tune into TBPN and see what their independent journalistic take on this would be.
Do you want to give listeners who may not be familiar with what you're talking about some context here?
I think the day after our piece closed, Ronan, or something like late last week, OpenAI acquired TBPN, which is this big sort of tech chat show. So that's one aspect of this answer, right? That as OpenAI expands and grows, they seem to be sort of buying up more of the press infrastructure to tell their own story.
Relatedly, by the way, a lot of announcements over there, concentrated around when they knew we were going to be running, and developed in the period where we were in these intensive conversations with them. And many of them sort of pointed at the topics in the piece. They announced this new safety fellowship that's very airy. They announced this new governance plan that's very sort of airy and ethereal, but are meant to, I think, occupy space in the conversation on the same topics. Sorry,
and look,
Andrew.
Everyone, Ronan, you should say more about this, but everyone, including Altman and the OpenAI execs we spoke to, recognizes the economic pressures here. I think you guys were there when he said, oh yeah, it's definitely a bubble and someone's going to lose a phenomenal amount of money, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like, even putting sort of the sci-fi Skynet stuff aside, the economic pressures are unavoidable. And a lot of it has to do with this sort of pitchman rhetoric, the exact thing we're talking about, right? Because these things are contingent. It's not like, oh, will it be a bubble or not? It's like, how hyped up will the cycle get is a byproduct of how people like Sam go around the world talking about it.
I want to ask sort of a basic question that I think people have probably raised with you, which is like, why does it matter who Sam Altman is? Like, if what we are talking about is a technology that could have profound implications on national security, the economy, potentially the future of humanity, it doesn't seem obvious to a lot of people why it matters who is running these companies. Because a very nice person who is very honest and very transparent in all their dealings could still release a rogue superintelligence that blows up the world. And a very manipulative person could release a very aligned model. And so what we should be paying attention to are the models themselves, not the people running the companies that make the models. I'm not saying I believe that, but I'm curious, what do you make of that argument that we are focusing too much on the humans and not enough on the technology?
We probably both have thoughts on this. I think I have two. The first of which is, it's worth noting that while reasonable minds could perhaps differ on the question you just posed, the answer provided by Sam Altman and the founders of OpenAI was very clear, which is actually part of the way the entire enterprise was structured when it was founded as a nonprofit, was they talked a lot about avoiding an AGI dictatorship. They really believed that actually the person who gets there first and has the most power over this technology is pivotal. The individual integrity is formative to the way the technology goes and the way it's controlled and the way it's used. The other thought that I have is, in my mind, you raise a valid point, and more significant than any of this is the structures around these individuals. We have a technology emerging that could really affect us all in all of the existential ways you just mentioned, and we don't have the regulatory guardrails to keep an eye on these folks. We are completely ceding the power to these individual companies and their whims, the mud fight between them, the quality control that each of them has or lacks. I think that, to me, is the big question. And the integrity of an individual figures in that, and it's important, but it reveals the weaknesses in the system. If you have someone who potentially lies all the time, could, in the eyes of many critics, be a danger, the important thing is to have the structures that account for that.
There's a great quote that you guys have in the piece from one of his former coworkers who talk about how Sam now has this track record of setting up these elaborate guardrails to keep him in check and then skillfully navigating around them. And it made me wonder if you had seen this piece in the Information this week about tensions that are being reported between Sam and his chief financial officer, Sarah Friar. She's reportedly expressed doubts that OpenAI will be ready for an IPO this year. And according to the story, Sam has noticeably and awkwardly excluded her from some conversations related to the company's financial plans, kept her out of some key meetings. I read that and I was like, well, this is exactly what you guys are writing about in your piece, right? You sort of bring in somebody whose job it is to look over the finances of the entire company, get it ready for an IPO, but then for whatever reason, we're going to sort of exclude her from some meeting. So anyway, I just sort of feel like we really are seeing the exact pattern that you guys are writing about now repeating in real time.
Yeah, and I mean, just to agree with all of this, I think the thing that Kevin's bringing up about given the power of this, why are we focusing on one personality? Like, I think that's very legit. I think that this is way beyond one person. This is way beyond one personality. It's not like the point of the piece is Sam shouldn't be AGI dictator, so Elon should, or Demis should, or whatever, right? It's to point out the fact that we're having a discussion about AGI dictators at all is insane. These guys know it's insane, and yet this seems to be the race that they see themselves being in.
When he was fired, he was brought back in part because I think no one could really imagine an OpenAI without Sam Altman. Do you think that's still the case?
I don't think it's unimaginable anymore. I think that part of reaching the scale that they've reached is that you can have a, Steve Jobs figure be replaced by a Tim Cook figure, right? It seems like it's inseparable from reaching this scale that becomes at least a possibility in people's minds, right, Ron? I mean, does that strike you that way?
Absolutely. I think the landscape has changed substantially over the period of time we were reporting this story. The fact that gradually more and more people were talking openly about this critique is very telling. We report in the piece that there are periodic spasms of senior executives at OpenAI talking about succession again. Of course, naturally, the company denies this, but also very interesting that in recent forms of that discussion, there has been talk about Fiji Simo being sort of the first potential successor candidate who could slot into any ideas of that type that circulate. Between our asking about that and the piece coming out, obviously, Simo has now gone on leave for medical reasons. There's a lot of reshuffling. We see it in the Sarah Fryer case. I think you're right to link it to that quote that's in the article about constraints being sidelined. And yet, I think these doubts and questions persist and are now much more out in the open.
On the leadership question, it just strikes me that, like, for somebody, who I assume wants to stay CEO for a long time, it's interesting to me that he's hired so many former public company CEOs to be his top lieutenants, right? It's like he has the former CEO of Instacart there. He has the former CEO of Nextdoor there. He has the former CEO of Slack there. So, that's you're bringing a lot of really sort of sharp and pointy elbows into the room when you do something like that. I'm trying to tell Sam that there's danger here.
Pro tip, if you're listening, Sam. Yeah. There are people in this piece talking about earlier tracts of Sam Altman's career where they feel he was deliberately avoiding that. Actually, part of what underpinned the terrible, terrible fumbling of the firing effort was a feeling that Sam had kind of stacked the board with, as one former member put it, JV people. Certainly, if we're being more charitable than that, people who were unprepared for the ruthless corporate warfare that ensued. I think one thing that has accompanied the emergence of this as a more openly discussed critique is that there's more people around this company, more stakeholders wanting, professionalizing influences in the mix.
I have to ask about one detail that I loved in the piece, which is that the first time that Sam Altman and Dario Amodei were scheduled to meet, they were going to meet at an Indian restaurant for dinner. This was back in, I guess, 2015. And Sam texted him and said that his Uber had gotten in a crash and he was going to be 10 minutes late to dinner. Now, you did not editorialize on that piece, but knowing you both, I'm sure that you went back through the Uber FOIA requests and found the logs of Sam Altman's Uber ride that night. Is it your belief that Sam Altman's Uber actually got in a crash?
I think we're just going to leave that as non-editorialized and let it stand right there by itself. We also, I will say, had this conversation and really liked just presenting that uninflected for consideration.
Okay, if you are the Uber driver who was driving Sam Altman to dinner with Dario Amodei and you are listening to this show, we do want to hear from you. We do want to hear your side. Hardfork@nytimes.com. We will get to the bottom of this.
We will.
Well, it's a great piece. People should go read it. Please do not investigate any other AI companies before my book comes out. It was a very stressful week for me.
Yeah, why don't you guys take a nice long spring, summer break before you get back at it?
Look into some politicians or Hollywood executives or something.
We'll send you some names.
Yeah.
Luckily, it takes us as long to write a piece as it takes you to write a book. So I think we're good.
Exactly. You'll beat us if we do anything else.
There's two of you. It should be faster.
Totally.
Ronan, Andrew, thanks so much for coming.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys. Your hats are in the mail.
Bless you.
Thank you for those. That's amazing.
That's very funny. I'm going to wear that. Well, Casey, it's been a pretty heavy show today.
Yeah.
So we thought we wanted to end on a positive note with our segment called One Good Thing.
One Good Thing, of course, our segment where we each talk about one thing that's been tickling our fancy lately. All right, Kevin, why don't you go first this time?
Okay, Casey, I am in love with this space mission.
Yes.
The NASA Artemis II mission, I have been totally and earnestly obsessed. My wife was like, "You sure are talking about this space mission a lot." I have been glued to this thing, and I have been filled with a kind of childlike glee and wonder that I did not know I still had the capacity to feel.
Now, what exactly are they doing on this mission?
Orbiting the moon. They are going further than any humans have gone from Earth before. They have gone 252,756 miles from Earth. And if you're wondering how many miles is that, well, the New York Times had a helpful comparison list.
And what do they find?
So you would need a chain of 2.37 billion of Nathan's Famous hot dogs to cover the distance that this spacecraft has gone from Earth.
That's great. Something we can all easily visualize. Thank you for that comparison.
Casey, I am learning things that I never expected to learn. I've been watching this with my kid. I have become completely obsessed with like concepts and terms that I did not know a week ago, including corona structure, the Terminator line, which I know you're wondering, that sounds scary.
Yeah.
It's actually the line that separates the sunlit side of the moon from the side that is dark.
Oh.
I also learned that we don't call it the dark side of the moon. That's not the preferred astronomical term.
What do we call it?
The far side of the moon.
The far side of the moon.
I am obsessed with all of these astronauts. There are 4 of them up there: Victor, Christina, Jeremy, Reed. This is my Mount Rushmore. I love these people who I've never met. They are adorable. They are incredibly brave. And I think we should go to the moon every single year. I think we should give NASA whatever budget it needs to do, because this has sort of reignited my faith in humanity.
Absolutely. You know, I also saw somebody on social media was posting that because the mission specialist, Christina Koch, had communicated with Houston's Jenny Gibbons during the mission, this mission actually passed the Bechdel test, which you don't often see on these missions. So I thought that was cool.
We will always choose Earth. We will always choose each other.
Integrity from Earth, our single system, fragile and interconnected. We copy. Those of us that can are looking back.
Also, somebody pointed out, they said, you know, the coolest thing about going on one of these missions, Kevin, would be leaving Florida at 5,000 miles an hour. So that resonated with me as well.
Okay, you're more interested in the jokes. I am filled with childlike wonder over here, and I just think this is the coolest thing imaginable.
It is very cool. You know, recently I had an opportunity to go stargazing. I'm not sure if you've been stargazing recently. I was up on Mauna Kea on the island of Hawaii.
Flex.
And we had a really cool telescope there with our guide. And I got to stare at the face of the moon. And it inspired a childlike sense of wonder in me as well. But it did not make me want to go there because it looked quite bleak, actually.
You wouldn't go to the moon?
No, there's no Wi-Fi.
Okay. Casey, what is your one good thing this week?
Today, Kevin, I want to talk about the only thing that can compete with the moon when it comes to inspiring childlike wonder in a person, and that is a weather app.
Okay, I'm listening.
So recently I was reading about these entrepreneurs, Adam Grossman, Josh Reyes, and Dan Bruton, And they are the team behind Acme Weather, which you probably have not heard of yet, but I bet you've heard of Dark Sky.
Yes.
Dark Sky was, by consensus, the best weather app on iOS. And while it rained during the 2010s, and I'm using rained in the sort of
the non-meteorological sense.
The non-meteorological sense, it would tell you whenever it rained. And now I am using it in the meteorological sense.
Very good app.
So this app was bought by Apple in 2020, which was like kind of a head scratcher. Apple already had a weather app. It was fine. And then Apple sort of integrated some of its forecasts and some of its other features into its weather app and then shut Dark Sky down in 2022. And this made people really sad because I think a lot of us feel, myself included, like the Apple weather app has never lived up to what Dark Sky was in its heyday.
It's like a prediction mark. It's like there's, maybe it's going to rain.
Exactly. Well, so these guys get back together and they say, frick it, we're doing weather apps again. And they make Acme Weather. And so you can download this now for iOS. It is apparently coming later to Android. And I know what you're thinking, Kevin, which is, what could you possibly build in 2026 in a weather app that could differentiate it from all the other weather apps that are already on the market, right?
Yes.
Are you wondering this?
I am wondering this.
Well, let me tell you a few things. Number one, they don't just tell you the weather, they show you a range of possibilities in a line chart. So most of the time, it'll be like, yeah, it's going to be 63 degrees in San Francisco today. But every once in a while, there's a lot of volatility in all the different signals that they use to predict the weather. And then you say, okay, I don't actually know what I'm walking into today. I better bring a couple of layers.
This is the weather app for rationalists and other believers in Bayesian statistics.
Exactly. Some of the other things that this app does, they will send you a push notification if they think there's going to be lightning in your neighborhood.
Okay.
They will also do that when they think a sunset is going to be beautiful wherever you happen to be.
Wow.
They'll send you an umbrella reminder if it's going to precipitate in the next 12 hours, and they'll send you a sunscreen alert when the UV index is high. But I'm saving my last two favorites for the end. Number one, they will send you an alert when the aurora borealis may be visible where you are.
That's beautiful.
I haven't gotten that notification yet, but I wake up every day hoping I'm going to get my aurora borealis notification.
Gotta go to Scandinavia, I think.
Number two, and this is just in time for Pride, they will tell you when there is a rainbow in your neighborhood.
Wow.
Are you kidding me? This is such a good idea for a weather app.
Yes.
Who does not want to be sitting at your wage slave job? You haven't been outside in like 7.5 hours. And then Acme Weather tells you, hey, guess what? There's a rainbow in your neighborhood. You're going to book it outdoors and you are going to behold the majesty of creation,
How are
Kevin.
they possibly collecting that data?
Well, interestingly, they're taking this Waze-like approach where they're inviting their community to submit reports. And so if a bunch of people say, hey, rainbow in my neighborhood, they're going to go out and send out a notification.
Wow.
So now look, this app does cost $25 a year. And I know, probably most people out there are perfectly content with the free weather app on their phone. That is fine for you. But as somebody who loves cool things, new ideas, people having fun, I just wanted to shout out Acme Weather because I think it's a really cool thing.
Now, what is the likelihood that this app will be purchased by Apple and then shut down?
I mean, if that happens, I hope these guys get paid again because somebody has to move the weather app industry forward, and these are the folks who are doing it.
I love that. Like, Grandpa, how did you make your fortune? Well, I built 17 weather apps that were identical and then sold them all to Apple.
I just also think it's inspiring that at a time when some companies are like, we're going to make a system that is going to force the world to rewrite all software, there are other guys who are like, what if there's a rainbow in my neighborhood? I want to find out about that. And those are the people that I want to highlight on today's show, Kevin.
Okay, well, download Acme Weather before the heat death of the universe renders weather irrelevant.
And tell us whether you liked it.
That was a good thing.
Thank you.
Thank you for alerting me to this wonderful rainbow detector.
Well, thank you for alerting me to the existence of the moon.
I know you weren't a big believer in the moon before, but hopefully I've convinced you today.
Well, somebody told me something about a soundstage and, maybe the landing was faked, so I've just been curious.
I think, we're the only podcasters who actually believe in the moon landing.
Yeah, that's our competitive advantage.
Hard Fork, where we believe that people have been to the moon.